Hi there, social workers. So, as our world is rapidly evolving and with new technologies, AI, all these different opportunities that I even talk about on my platform as different ways that we as social workers can make money, I thought it was important that we have a refresher course on our code of ethics. So, consider this your annual code of ethics or ethics training that most of us already need when it comes to our clinical licensure. So today I'm just going to really talk about um, the six core values, most importantly, right? These are the values that guide us as social workers, but not only just guide us, but also they they should dictate how you operate within your work, right? So whether you're at the hospital, whether you're at the local outpatient agency, whether you're with defects and you are a supervisor, a clinical supervisor. I just want to be clear here. I'm talking to the licensed clinical social workers here. This is also applicable to all social workers, but my main target or my main focus is our licensed clinical social workers, because what you don't want to see happen is that you work so hard your entire career to get your license, and in an instance, boom, you lose it, right? That's your livelihood, right? Your livelihood is now gone. So consider this your ethics refresher without the CEUs. Unfortunately, rather, I can't give CEUs on YouTube, but hopefully that will not stop you all from engaging and having this conversation. So in this video, you'll learn about the six core areas. Of course, we'll get that refresher, if you will, because you already know it. We'll talk about real world ethical challenges as social workers today that we face, right? What's going on out there, and the constant challenges or we're met with, really. And then kind of talk about how we can stay grounded within our professional ethics that protect both you and your clients, and most importantly, practical tips. I had an interesting conversation today because what sparked this was really that I was having a conversation with a colleague, and shout out to you for sparking this conversation and sparking this video or motivating this video. There was a conversation about travel, social work, and social workers working strikes, and the conversation came up on whether or not that was ethical for social workers to work a strike, right? Work a strike in lieu of fellow social workers being on strike. And that posed a valid question. And so the natural thing that I did was go ahead and pull my code of ethics. And so if you aren't familiar with the code of ethics, here it is here. I'm not going to read the preamble or the core values or ethical principles. Actually, I am going to read the ethical principles. I'm going to read all six, right? First value is service. Second value is social justice. Third value is dignity, worth of the person. Fourth value, importance of human relationships. Fifth value, integrity. And sixth value is competence, right? And so when we think into connection of the particular example that I gave earlier, really in relation to social workers working strikes, and those strike contracts can be very lucrative, they can be very enticing, so it can get your attention, right? There's one going on now that I talked about and posted about, even on here on my shorts. I posted on Instagram, I posted on TikTok, but they're paying like $10,000 to $11,000 a week. And so this is naturally how the question came about. Is it ethical for social workers to work strikes? And so my response is that yes, it is ethical. Is it? I think it's more of a question of moral versus ethical. And for me, how I conceptualize it, ethical means, right? Am I causing harm? Is it impacting the well-being of my clients? Is it impacting the basic needs of my clients? Is it me neglecting to pay particular attention to the empowerment of the vulnerable people and the oppressed people or people living in poverty? And because of that, and because I'm conceptualizing in that way, I don't see necessarily that it is an ethical violation. However, what I will say is that we can definitely view it from a couple of particular values, and those particular values that I'm going to highlight right now is the social justice one, and also the integrity one. So I want to start with integrity. So the value around integrity and ethical principles that social workers behave in a trustworthy manner. And so what I had introduced to her is that there can be an argument about whether or not we are acting in or behaving in a trustworthy manner by crossing picket lines, right? Or by going against our colleagues who are protesting. We can certainly make the argument about that. However, again, when you go back to like causing harm, thinking about enhancing human well-being, when you think about fighting for clients' basic human needs and rights, when you think about fighting for clients who are in marginalized communities or struggling with poverty and oppression, I don't think that fits well enough to kind of say that it's unethical. So let's just say that. And then looking, of course, at social justice, the social justice piece says that social workers challenge social justice. Now, again, you can make the argument, we can make the argument either way. And I think that's the issue with part of this is that sometimes a lot of it is like clear and concise, like there's no doubt about it. And other areas a little gray. And I think that's why it's going to be the responsibility of our boards and the powers that be on top of social workers to really take a look at this, right? And to kind of apply it to certain more relevant topic areas. So, like, all in all, I'm just going to say that I don't agree that, working a strike or working a contract in any sort of way is a direct, indirect violation of the National Social Work Code of Ethics. And if you are a social worker, you should have your code of ethics by you in your office, in your home office, wherever, all the time, because we are constantly confronted with these types of challenges all the time as social workers. And I want to just talk about different other scenarios, right? A lot of conversations have been about AI, right? And so AI, right? Artificial intelligence. Some people are using it as therapists. Some therapists are using it in ways to like record sessions, to enhance or simplify the documentation process. And look, I'm all for it. Y'all have seen me here talk ad nauseum about auto notes because I love the product. I love the guys. But this is where again, is it a code of ethic violation? And when we look at the code of ethics, we look at the different values, right? Like service, social justice, dignity and self-worth, importance of human relationships, integrity, competence. None of that directly violates the code of ethics. And again, if we use this to justify, we use this as a way to kind of support the work that we are doing, that's how we can remind ourselves that whether we're doing right or we're doing completely wrong, right? And so again, refer back to your code of ethics as always. And another example that I want to kind of discuss and hopefully get some feedback from you all in the comments is like there was a recent case in my town, actually. There was a hospital where the hospital discharged a patient from the inpatient side for what allegedly had been about the patient no longer meeting criteria. Therefore, Medicare said that they would no longer continue paying for the patient's stay. And so as a result, the patient was discharged into the community. The patient was homeless. And so a lot of what the conversations are now is that, oh, well, that's on social work because social work discharged the patient to homelessness. And so again, we got to ask ourselves, it was that social, and I don't know the social worker. I don't work at the hospital. I don't have any affiliation. I'm not even going to name the hospital because I don't think all that is necessary. I think we have the bigger picture so we know how to apply the code of ethics. And so one can certainly argue that, that social worker or the social workers on that team potentially did violate some of the code of ethics. And some of those code of ethics that were possibly violated include social justice, right? Social workers challenge social injustice. Poverty is a social injustice, unfortunately. Dignity and self-worth of a person. One could argue that both ways, right? Because dignity and worth of the person says that social workers respect the inherent dignity and worth of that person. What that means is that sometimes our patients can make the decisions that they fit their lives, right? Even if that goes against what we believe as human beings, even if that goes against what we believe is right or wrong, our patients and clients have a right to make a decision for themselves, even if that is a quote unquote bad decision in our eyes. And I say this all the time, as somebody that covers a hospital too, like people have the right to make bad decisions, even if I don't agree with it. And so I had a case yesterday. Somebody was just telling me how this patient expressed that they no longer want to continue treatment on a particular treatment that they were receiving. And I'm just like, hey, patients have a right to decide that for themselves. It's not the best decision, probably not the best medically the best decision, but that's not I'm here to support the patient. I'm here to be an advocate for the patient. So going back to that example is we could also highlight the importance of human relationships, right? Social workers recognize the central importance of human relationships. So there are a number of ways that we can say the client, or rather that social worker in that particular instance rather, has broken a number of code of ethics. However, one thing that people often forget when they see these news stories, which are often sensationalized, is that a social worker is just a part of the larger healthcare system. A social worker is often taking orders from the physician as to what is needs to happen, right? And the social worker within the hospital is only going to be as good as what is accessible to them as far as resources, as far as like what policy states or what policy has available for people in these vulnerable positions. So I don't think people often look at it from that perspective. I think people just see the wrong that was done and they get frustrated, and we are quick to point fingers. And I get that, right? In our frustrations, we're looking for somebody to blame, we're looking for somebody to take fault, we're looking for somebody to sort of blow off steam. And so to that I understand. So again, this is one of those instances where it kind of gets gray because it's just so layered. And again, if I'm looking at this, certainly I can make the argument one way, certainly I can make the argument another way. There's a lot of gray in this, right? Bottom line is, like, if I'm looking at my values, if I'm looking at these principles, am I making sure that guides me, right? Because this, in the same way I argued against, in the ways that this person may have violated the ethics, somebody can argue differently, right? And so that's when the issues kind of rise up. But again, if you're keeping this by your desk, if you're keeping this, in your home office, if you're keeping this in your notebook, this will serve you well in many instances. And, one of the other things, especially in a growing world of technology, growing world of, being online like I am chronically, unfortunately, I I often meet people, and so sometimes, people want to work with me in one-to-one therapy, and that's not always possible for me. Hey, Netta. Um, and so I often try to avoid dual relationships because that's another code situation that we have to try to avoid, entering dual relationships. And that's one of the things that we have to be mindful of. Like, I saw a social worker the other day on TikTok, and it's admirable. It's amazing. It's innovative. She opened a hair salon to provide therapy and do hair. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, yo, sis, that's great. But that's a potential dual relationship, right? That's a potential ethical violation. Like, you can get in trouble for that. You can lose your clinical license. Now, granted, she has her hair license to fall off on, but if you're anything like me, we worked way too hard to obtain this license. I'm really not trying to give it up or lose it for anything, but those are the things. And I didn't want to comment under her post because, like, it's a celebration. It is amazing, right? But like, and the other thing is, she was at LMSW as well, which was, again, you got to be under supervision to know and understand that it's great, it's noble, but baby, that's a direct violation of your code of ethics, right? Knowingly entering that dual relationship. And when the code says dual relationship, what they're referring to is just like, you have several relationships with this person, business relationships or types of relationships with this person, right? So like, I'm doing her hair, I'm doing her therapist, I do her taxes, I clean her car, right? You're getting money from this person in all these types of ways. And so we have to be mindful of that. And sometimes we can't avoid that because maybe you live in a small town, maybe you're from a small state or something like that. But those are things you got to consider. So all in all, code of ethics, I can't stress this enough. Us as social workers, we work too hard to you lose your license over a mishap. So definitely, if you don't have a copy, I don't remember even where I got this, but as you can see, I've had it for a long time and I will never let go of it. It stays in my office, and I make sure that I always have it accessible to me whenever a situation comes up, or whenever, I'm just working on a new project and I want to be informed, or I want to make sure that I'm doing something correctly. So I always have a code of ethics with me. And something that I want to introduce to you all is, like, I use my AI because I want to disclose that, because I want to be ethically concise. I use this AI to build a model around ethical decision making. So similar to how when we were in grad school, we had decision trees. I might be showing my age, but we had decision trees that helped us, like, differentiate certain diagnoses that look really similar. So the idea behind the Compass ethical decision making model is that for social workers, we know that um, it can be difficult to kind of, or we know that there's a lot of gray areas and a lot of these ethical or complex ethical dilemmas. And so this is to help guide you as a social worker. Um, to answer your question, I'm still trying to obtain employment in social work 8 months post grad. What state are you in, girl? Yeah, that's unheard. Virginia. I mean, I'd 8 months post grad, and you. It's been so hard. Like, what type of worker have you been looking at, or like, tell me about that. That's so frustrating. I mean, I'd love to meet with you one to one on the house on me to kind of figure this out. Experience has been an issue. Have you considered like what did you do your internships? Like that's a big thing too. That's a great way to build out your resume. Like putting that out, are your internships on your resume? Well, listen, Netta, if you are interested, I'd love to meet with you one to one for like 15 minutes just to kind of figure this out. Because 8 months, that's kind of unheard of. And I'm pretty sure, especially if you've had two consistent internships through your graduate program, that you will have what it takes and you have the experience that you need. You just probably need to modify your resume and kind of think about what strategies you're taking to apply to work. Just email me or just comment on a video and drop your email, or you can drop, well, don't drop it here because once I close out the live, I think it will be gone. So um, you can comment on a video, you can email me, and then we can follow up because that's wild. 8 months is way too long to go without a job, especially if you have an MSW, because we're just in high demand. Like, so let's do that follow up. Okay, so going back to the compass. So I want you to think of the acronym COMPASS, right? COMPASS. And so first I want you to start with C. So clarify the situation, right? Identify all the stakeholders involved. And stakeholders are, who are the people involved in this case? Is it the client, family, agency, community, and you in your role as a social worker? Are you a clinical social worker? Are you a CPS social worker? Like what is your role here? And then I want you to gather all relevant facts. What are the facts? Forget emotions for a second. Forget what you think could be. Forget what you think might be. Forget all that. What are the facts in this situation? Then I want you to determine the ethical issues. What is the ethical issue at play? What values or principles, again, what values or principles are at impossible conflict at this time? And then I want you to consider cultural factors, right? Y'all know I train a lot on cultural competency, so this is really important to me. But consider the cultural factors, right? I say this all the time. What we deem as normal isn't necessarily the standard for the rest of the world, right? We come from one perspective, primarily the westernized, Americanized culture, and nothing's wrong with that, but not everybody shares those views, right? So you may be coming into a case, you may be coming working with a client, and maybe they won't shake your hand, and you're just like, what's going on with you? Like, why is she rude to me? People, some cultures just don't shake hands, right? So we have to keep the cultural factors in mind. And then some ongoing questions to ask yourself is, who's going to be affected by this situation, right? Is my client's safety being jeopardized? Let's think about, I gave you guys the example of, or excuse me, you all the example about the young lady who opened the hair salon and is doing counseling as a business model. And again, it's innovative, it's creative. I love that for her. However, it does pose a potential dual relationship, which is a direct ethical violation. So who would be affected in that situation, right? Is it her? Is it her client? It could be, right? And what would that violation possibly look like, right? And what are the facts versus assumptions? Now I have to even challenge myself. That, and again, that's why I was mindful and not commenting under there, because I didn't want to come off as like, first off, I'm not an authority figure. I may be a clinical supervisor, but I'm not her clinical supervisor, so that's not my place. And so, what were the facts versus the assumptions in that? My assumption is that she's doing one-to-one therapy in the hair salon because this is what she stated, but I don't know the facts, right? And so what are the ethical principles at stake? As I mentioned earlier, the possible ethical principle at stake was the dual relationship, right? We know that's something that's not supposed to happen within our field. We're supposed to avoid it as much as possible. So that is Compass. That is a framework that I came up with alongside AI that I want you all to use to kind of help and support you as you are navigating these cases or these situations or these scenarios that come up for you, right? And so, the other things to consider, right? So I gave you the C. The O consists of options and alternatives. I want you to think about, brainstorm also possible courses of actions that you can take as opposed to the one that you may be taking, especially if you've like answered and gone through the first process and kind of figured out for yourself, this might be a potential problem. Go through that process and brainstorm, include creative solutions, not just the obvious ones. You can consider doing nothing as an option as well, but understand that non-action is a choice that also comes with consequences. And explore consultation opportunities. Always, 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 whenever possible, you need to consult a clinical supervisor. And so that within that instance with that young woman, she didn't, I don't know her. Again, I just saw it on TikTok on my FYP. I don't know if she has a clinical supervisor, but one of the things that I would recommend is that you need to speak to your clinical supervisor about this. And again, questions to consider, right? What are all the possible ways to handle this? What would happen if I did nothing, right? Because remember, non-action or inaction is an action that can come with potential consequences. And who can I consult with about this situation, right? Always, always, always consult your clinical supervisor. And if you're like at my stage of the career where I don't have a clinical supervisor because I operate autonomously on my own independently, I can always pay for a consultation group and just jump in there and pay, they're not always paid for, but a lot of them do require you pay. Jump in there with a team of professionals and just sit and chat and go through some of these scenarios with them, and they can give me that feedback. Okay, and then, so we have COM. We're going to map the consequences, short-term impacts, long-term impacts, unintended consequences, benefits and risk, or risk and benefits, right? You're going to map that out for yourself. And then I can show you an example. Well, I don't know how to share my screen on here. I don't think I can. Anyways, we'll neglect that. So that's the M, right? Create a little table, checks and balances, or pros and cons in terms of benefits and risks. Same thing for each stakeholder, right? For the client, for the agency, for your business, for your license. Who's the stakeholder that's being identified? And then P, professional standards review, right? And it's a code of ethics. Go get your code of ethics. Which ethical principle does this apply to, right? State licensing requirements. What does your state say about it, right? Does your state say, oh, it's cool, just let us know, give us a heads up, write a letter? Cool, do that. Agency policies, if you're working for yourself or you're working for your agency, right? What does your agency say about this? I've worked in agencies that made it clear that you are not to have a dual relationship with any of these clients, right? Don't give them the money, none of this, none of that. Don't follow them on social media. It was clearly spelled out in the agency policies. Then best practice standards. What does the current research and practice wisdom suggest about this particular scenario that you're navigating, right? And then again, some questions to consider. What does the NASW Code of Ethics say, right? Y'all see, I have my Code of Ethics right here. Am I legally required to take any certain actions, right? Do I need to tell somebody? Do I need to call my board and speak to one of the attorneys and kind of run through the scenario too before I fully commit to this? And then what other competent professionals do I have accessible to me? You should always have a clinical supervisor or consultation group. And then A, assess your values and your biases. Sometimes, again, we all have biases. In my cultural competency training, I talk about this a lot. We all have biases. Some we can see and some are just so far out of sight, we don't even realize are there. And so understanding your personal values examination, what is influencing you to do this thing, right? Why are you so committed to doing this thing? Cultural bias check. Are you making assumptions based on your background? Emotional factors. Are your emotions are your emotions driving you to do this thing, right? Even though you know it's wrong. Professional versus personal conflict. Oh, well, this is just something that I always want to do, so I'm just going to do it regardless. Not the best. Again, especially if you like work really hard and you have that clinical license. This is your livelihood. This feeds you. This is your bread and butter, right? You work so hard. It's like a doctor going all through medical training, then completing residency, and then gets through it, and then does something crazy, and then now is at the medical board and is potentially losing his medical license. Now he can't practice as a doctor, right? So all that hard work gone in an instance, right? So you really got to think about it. And the same thing with social work, same thing with nursing, same thing with all of us. As professionals, we are held to a higher standard in a sense. We're not all perfect, but we are held to a standard and we must adhere to that because I think it's actually good. We need to be held accountable. Unlike life coaches, unlike doulas, like these people, these paraprofessionals, I'm going to call them, none of those people are held to a higher standard, right? They just do whatever they want. So that means they can cause harm with no repercussions. That's why I tell people be very mindful and engaging with some of those professionals. So then we have S, selective and supervised implementation. Choose the best option. You choose the best option for you. Just know it comes with consequences or not. And you're going to choose the best option based on the analysis that you did with yourself, right? The COMPASS, right? So then you're going to create implementation plan, build into supervision and consultation, right? So that you can discuss it, schedule, check in about it, establish some sort of monitoring system. If you feel like it's to that extent, you want to make sure you cover your bases. And then prepare for course corrections as needed. And then lastly, study the outcomes. What does it turn out? What evaluate the results, right? Did this chosen action achieve the intended goal? Identify the lessons learned. What would you do differently next time? Like, obviously you don't have to do this in every instance, but I would recommend like doing it in the instance where like there's something that maybe you are considering taking on and you're not too sure if it's an ethical violation, you're not too sure, you're in that gray area. Whip out your code of ethics and go through that compass framework that I just kind of spelled out for you all. So that is pretty much all I wanted to talk to y'all today. Sometimes I get things on my heart. Sometimes, God be like, get on live and tell these people about this. And so this, I think, will be a helpful framework as we continue to evolve, as we continue to grow, as things continue to get thrown our way, as technology continues to become something that we are growing more and more dependent on. It comes with its challenges, and so we got to be prepared for that. And thank you, Netta. Even today, like my electricity literally shut down while I was on a session with the client. Thankfully, we were on a call. We weren't on Zoom because we had jumped off of Zoom because it wasn't working correctly. And literally my power went out, right? And I was typing. And so I had to go back to pen and paper. And so again, we can't be overly reliant on technology. And we have to be mindful of how we're using these things. So yeah, that's it. Y'all, thank you for hanging with me this afternoon. I do have a session that I got to run to. But if you have any questions about the framework, compass, ethics, make sure you send this to the NASW. Let's make this a real training so that we can get CEUs. All that. Let me know in the comments, and thank you for hanging with me.